Welcome, everyone, to our first episode of 2023 of Veritas Live. I'm Eric Wiggins, your guest host this week, and I'm coming to you from the great state of Texas. As usual, we'd like to know where you're coming from and who you're tuning into, so please hashtag Veritas Live in the comments below, and please excuse the excitement outside my apartment with all the fire alarms going off. Today, we're going to be going into our research for 2022 on the cloud. And we're joined today by James Toone from Vanson Bourne. He is the research project lead for this project and our strategic partner in this research. James?
Hello.
Thank you for joining. We're also joined by our data resiliency expert, Sonya Duffin, or as I like to call her, the best boss ever, who makes great jazz hands.
Thanks, Eric. Really happy to be here.
As usual, we like to start the show with a little bit of a fun icebreaker. Today, we're going to be asking the question, are you a coffee or a tea person? For me, I'm a coffee person, being that I own 3 espresso machines.
That's a lot.
Yes, it is. James, what are you?
I think I'm going to have to go tea. I think being from England, I think it would, it's got to be tea, isn't it?
Well, I am a hardcore tea drinker as well, so tea wins today.
I guess the teas have it, unfortunately. So if those of you in the audience like coffee, just hashtag coffee, all right? So let's start off by setting the stage for this research. Sonya, can you take us through some of the goals that we had for this research project?
Sure. It's now very clear that there's a cloud-first approach being adopted by enterprises across the globe. And what that means is there's a fundamental change happening in IT, and we really wanted to dive in and learn more. What is really happening and really get some clear data points. Like we need the numbers to really get a clear picture of what's happening. So we partnered with Vanson Bourne, who we work very closely with to do research projects regularly to really map out the right way to approach this and get the information that we're really looking for. James, why don't you tell us a little bit about the research methodology?
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, in order to do the research, in order to hit those objectives you just mentioned, it's really important to iron out the respondent type. Who are we talking to? We need to make sure that these respondents are exactly right. Otherwise, there's effectively no point doing the research. So in terms of that respondent type, we needed to make sure that they had a specific level of seniority. They had to be involved in purchasing technology for their organization. And as this research all kind of revolves around the public cloud, they had to be within an IT or kind of DevOps department. They had to have some involvement with that aspect. And in terms of an organization as well, we also kind of drilled down into the organization because, again, there's no point interviewing these people if their organization didn't use public cloud because, again, there's no point in doing the research. So we basically put in a process of this strict criteria for these respondents. And if they didn't meet that criteria, then they screened out because we only wanted, those people who could answer the questions. Otherwise, the questions wouldn't be, applicable to them, in which case we wouldn't have hit those objectives.
That's wonderful. Thank you for setting up, the background for this research project. Let's step into some of the results and what really surprised both of you about the results. Sonya, what was the most surprising thing you found in the results?
Well, Eric, there was a lot of surprises, but I will say the biggest one for me was that 9 out of 10 organizations have experienced downtime in the last 2 years. But what's really surprising is when you click into that, right? The reasons for that have changed. So I would say historically, it's been the common knowledge that the number one reason for downtime is usually the human error aspect, which is, fat fingering, the wrong key, or maybe an employee changes a file by accident or updates a file by accident, or even maybe an employee opens an email and clicks on a link that has malicious code. So all of these reasons were typically known common knowledge to be the top reason. What was fascinating to me is that that's now at the bottom of the list. And there's a lot of other things that have taken over. The most fascinating is that cyber attacks is number 1, and that hardware, software outages, along with applications going down and natural disasters also have gone above human error. And then really interesting, which very surprising, is that 40% had said that their cloud service providers going down caused their downtime. And that's a very high number for that I think there's a lot that we should unpack there because 40% is a very high number to have downtime from that.
Definitely. So, James, what did you find interesting about the results?
Yeah, so I think one of the most interesting things that we found was that we had a question around the cloud responsibility model. And for anyone who hasn't seen it, basically we had this question and we had a set of 5 answers, 4 or 5 answers. And basically one was the correct understanding, the correct definition, whereas the remaining answers were essentially red herrings. And the idea was to gauge an understanding of what percentage of respondents fully understood this concept. And actually the surprising part was only 6% said that they had, selected the correct statement, which is absolutely staggering thinking about it. And of course, what this means is, if these respondents believe that a third party and not themselves are responsible for the data stored in the cloud, then that opens the door for all sorts of problems because, in essence, they are responsible for that data. And by believing someone else's, then it's staggering, really. It opens the door to all sorts of cyber attacks and all the problems associated with that.
Right. There's a lot of people assuming that things are happening that aren't, and that's really concerning for sure. Absolutely. That's a good point. So
it would definitely correlate those 2 data points together based on what you said, Sonya, and on what you said, James. And we do actually have a question from the audience. They want to know, 40% of the outages by cloud providers, they'd like to learn more about that particular data point. Sonya, can you give us a little bit more context in there?
Yeah, and that means that the cloud, their operations for their business went down because something happened at the cloud service provider level. Like the cloud had an outage and they were kind of at the mercy of and waiting for the cloud to come back up. And we've heard a couple stories of that in the media. When they have significant outages that are more than an hour or 2, that can cause big challenges for businesses, especially if your business operations is depending on your cloud data.
And this, I would assume, would not just be things like, AWS. It would be things like even SaaS services and stuff like that, things like Zoom or even Microsoft Teams having issues.
Yes. Yeah, any of the big cloud service providers, but also the services that we depend on to make our businesses run today.
James, do you have anything to add?
No, I think Sonya's covered it. It's very surprising, really. Really, really quite interesting.
Okay. Right. So based on this research, let's step into some of the things that actually surfaced in terms of the top challenges that enterprise customers have experienced as a result of moving more and more to the cloud in the last 2 years. So Sonya, would you like to handle that one? What were the top challenges that you saw surface from this research?
Well, the subject that's near and dear to my heart and something I'm very passionate about is cybersecurity and ransomware. And it was clear 89% experienced a ransomware attack in the last year on data they've held in the cloud. What's interesting about that is that typically, historically, there's a lot of folks out there who believe that if their data's in the cloud, it's safe. There's a lot of safeguards put in place, and there's a lot of security, which is very much, it's happening. But the problem we are seeing is that cyber criminals are very savvy. TechTarget reported last year that cloud is now the #1 attack vector. So what we're seeing is that there are now ways to get into your cloud data. They're using methods that are maybe a little unconventional. So just because it's in the cloud does not mean it's safe. So we have to think about really putting all of the safeguards in place to make sure that you have, if maybe a bad actor is in your environment, they can't get very far and they definitely can't get to your cloud environments. And that is, that's a high number, 89%.
Definitely is. James, were you surprised by that 89% number as well?
Yes, I was. But at the same time, when you link it back to that cloud responsibility model and the understanding, if they believe that someone else is responsible, then 89% potentially, it could seem feasible that, they think someone else is responsible for it, but actually, ultimately, it's them. So the door is open, so to say.
Okay. And what top challenges did you find in the research?
Yeah, so I think challenges around data sprawl, data visibility was quite interesting. It was around 4 in 10, I believe. I think it was 41% said that the organization does not have complete visibility over the data stored within cloud environments, which, instantly I'm thinking, well, if you don't have visibility, how are you keeping that safe? And again, that links back to that cloud shared responsibility model that it's obviously not safe, is it? And then, of course, if they don't have the visibility on it, then how can they use that data effectively at the end of the day? Because at the end of the day, that's what it's there for. But interestingly, I think it was around approaching 3/4, so around 71% reported that their organization's ability to track its entire data footprint was in need of at least significant improvements. So there is that acknowledgement that that's not where it could be at the moment. Mm-hmm. And it is encouraging to see that, that they acknowledge that, but at the same time, our organization is going to act on that, because if they don't act on it, then it doesn't mean much.
Yes, I would definitely say it's interesting, that number that you just stated, because, in talking with customers, we do know that over the last 2 years, they've added a lot of things. It's been a lot of like adopt and go strategies in mm-hmm. terms of getting people up and running in remote work, in functions that normally did not have to use remote work tools. So those would all of those things are actually based in the cloud most of the time. So I can definitely see that's an issue from a data visibility perspective. Mm-hmm. Sonya, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, it's alarming. I mean, dark data can't be secure, and it also can't be compliant. And that's really an important point to think about, is we really need a clear understanding of where every piece of data is in your environment, so that it can be both protected and safeguarded, but also stay compliant and make sure that you're not putting your company at risk.
That's interesting you bring that up, because the thing that I actually saw as a top challenge was the cost, the complexity, and compliance issues that have actually arisen from this, being that 94% of the organization said that they experienced increased cost in going to the cloud, which is very surprising for all of us, because most of us have the misconception that moving to the cloud, we'd actually be saving money based on, infrastructure costs and being able to scale up and down. But the average overages was 43% over what they actually predicted their costs to be. That's a significant amount of money. And we've heard horror stories of people, getting large cloud usage bills after the fact. The other thing is 41% actually said they had increased complexity challenges when moving to the cloud over the last 2 years. And then 35% with the compliance issues. It's a lot. When you think about it, moving to those cloud service providers, you're adding additional services that you need to track all of that data being, transferred back and forth, not only for legal purposes, but even just for the fact that you want to stay compliant with even your own internal policies as well. Sonya, do you have anything to add on that piece?
Yeah, cost is a hot topic at the moment, and I didn't expect to see the number so high. I mean, we've been hearing horror stories that folks expect, because they move to the cloud, that costs are going to go down, and then their costs triple or quadruple even, and that can, for some companies, be millions of dollars a month, which is not something that's sustainable. But to actually see the numbers that high, and that is not just a 1 in 2 situation, was really surprising to me, and something that I think we should be talking about more, because it's an important subject for sure.
Definitely. So James, from your perspective at Vanson Bourne, do you think that these numbers are surprising in terms of the cost and complexity issues, or is that something you actually had expected?
Yeah, I mean, in terms of costs, it's not unusual. We definitely see, costs coming out kind of as a main kind of takeaway, if you will. It appears that people don't necessarily understand all the costs associated with the public cloud. Initially, there may be an eye-watering kind of cheap price to get them into it, and then actually, when you kind of look at all the add-ons, whether that's storage limits, data transfers, all those kind of things that come with it, there's actually a lot of associated costs. And yeah, I don't think quite everyone understands that to begin with, or that's what the research suggests anyway.
Yes, it'll definitely be interesting to see what happens since in the past 2 years, we've all been racing to get things moving and up in the cloud as much as possible. How that's actually going to change as the economy has changed, as IT budgets have changed, especially in this year.
Yeah, there's a lot of chatter that IT budgets are going to be slashed this year. So teams were going to have to get real creative on what to do with the limited budgets they have.
Mm-hmm.
There'll be some changes in what they choose as their top tier data versus lower tiers and what's important. All right.
Yeah.
So let's kind of step into our key takeaways from this research. My first key takeaway was that 3/4 of those surveyed, actually, the CSP tools fell short of their security needs overall, which is interesting because they still rely on those CSP tools for their security. So it'll be interesting to see how that actually is changing over the next year, even with the IT budgets being slashed. So James, what was your key takeaway from the research?
Yeah, I think one of my key takeaways was that the vast majority of organizations were using native cloud security tools to some extent. And in terms of these cloud security tools, a lot of people reported that they did so because they were cost effective or easy to use. I think around just over 50% agreed with each of those benefits. But actually, when you drill down into the results and kind of how secure they thought these security tools were, actually those cost effective and easy to use kind of became voided in a way. I think it was around just under 2/3 of respondents, so 63%, said that there were gaps in cybersecurity when using native cloud security tools. And then a similar proportion said that relying solely on those tools put their organization at risk. So when we're talking about, okay, yes, these tools may be cost effective, but if they're not doing the job that they're meant to be doing, then they're not cost effective, because at the end of the day, you're going to have cyber security attacks, you can have breaches, you can have all sorts of problems, and with that come all sorts of costs. So to look at them as cost effective is not the right way. And again, I'm going to link this back to the cloud shared responsibility model, where this combination of misunderstanding and reliance on, again, 99% are using them to some extent. This reliance and misunderstanding, I think that's a recipe for disaster, and this is really putting organizations at risk.
Right.
Definitely. Sonya, what was your big key takeaway from the research?
Well, sure. We asked a question around what kind of data safeguards do you have in your environment? And I was happy to see that a lot of them were implemented. Malware scanning, immutable storage, credential control. All of these are really great things and really important to have in your environment. But what was alarming to me is the numbers are still really low. So only 49% had differing admin credentials implemented in their environment. So that means 49% of enterprises out there maybe have some godlike passwords giving access to data, or maybe some shared passwords, which is really not a best practice. And we're seeing that a lot. A lot of the big, breaches that come out, often the story comes back to simple things like a password was shared or it was a simple one. So it brings me back to this, public service announcement I like to make all the time is really make sure your passwords are long, at least 12 characters with varied, upper, lowercase symbols and numbers. But also, if you're, an enterprise, make sure that you're really thinking through an entire strategy around credential, because that is often the most common way that cyber criminals get into your environment and then are able to navigate around and move laterally because they have a password that allows them to do that. So that is a simple thing you can do today to fix a lot of the challenges. Another thing you could do today to be really solid is get immutable storage implemented in your environment right away. And those numbers were also very low, 37%. And that, to me, these are numbers that are low, but they are they should be so much higher. So what I, was encouraged is that it's happening, but I'm discouraged that the numbers are so low, and that's avoidable. These are all things that we can implement quickly to make sure that we have these safeguards in place, that we're not, a victim of an attack or a breach. And, this is something I'm clearly very passionate about. So I feel even more passionate that now I want to double down and make sure that we're getting the message out there and sharing this data and sharing this awareness so that folks can protect themselves and be ready.
I would agree, definitely. We can always add, passwords with jazz hands for sure. Change your passwords and make them long.
Yes, 12 characters.
12 characters at least. I try to use sentences in my passwords, actually, because it makes it easy to remember, but hard for people to guess.
Yes. Yeah, that's also a really important thing. Don't use your birthday. Don't use a common word. Don't use your street that you live on. Don't use your first car. All those questions that you see on Facebook, that the surveys. Don't use any of those answers.
And don't share those answers on Facebook. That would also be a suggestion I would recommend as well.
Very important. Yes. For sure.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much, Sonya. I just want to say thank you to both of you for sharing your thoughts on this topic. Really appreciate it. So do you guys have any other closing comments that you'd like to make before we close out the show? Sonya?
Well, I would say, the research showed that a lot of progress has been made, and I'm really encouraged by that. We have a lot of work still to do. And I think we're navigating a very, treacherous time with all of the, cyber criminals out there and all of the new kind of new technology that, is really focused on having a lot of access and sharing freely and being able to, do complex things out at the edge. So really thinking about security in everything we do and data security in everything we implement is so important. So my big takeaway is we have a lot of work to do still, but, we have the right tools and solutions are out there. It's really just getting the word out, honestly.
And James, do you have any closing comments overall?
Yeah, I would echo Sonia's statement there. I think, this research really kind of highlights some of the vulnerabilities. But, as Sonia says, there are, solutions out there to help mitigate that. And, overall, I think this research was really interesting. We got some really good stats here. And yeah, I'm just glad that Vanson Bourne could be a part of it.
Yeah. Well, we really appreciate your partnership on it. It was a great project to work on.
Yeah, definitely. It was wonderful to work with you, James. I want to thank you both for joining us today on Veritas Live. And if you in the audience want to check out more on the numbers and dig into the details, the links are below for our cloud research, as well as if you'd like to just look at a beautiful graphic with some great summary of all of the results. We do have an infographic as well available for you to check out too. So, and we'd also like you to check out our Voice of Veritas podcast, Unlocking the Hidden Challenges of the Cloud. That's available as well, the link below. And in our next episode, we'll be unveiling a new host, which some of you may be familiar with, and we're really excited for him to join the Veritas Live team. So until then, stay secure and back up often. Thank you for joining.
Thank you.
Bye.